This book review is prepared by Gonzales Darius and Hoybia Clarence.
They dared the open seas and patiently bore the brunt of the angry waves. Hungry, thirsty, over fatigue, their bodies were weak, but not their spirit. The journey was long and dangerous, yet they continued sailing on, powered only by one desire: to bring the good news of Christ to the people of the Philippines. The year was 1521. The first Spanish missionaries planted the cross of Christ on Philippine soil.
So this is the cover of the book The Friars in the Philippines by Rev. Ambrose Coleman, O.P. So our author for this book is Ambrose Coleman. He was born 1858 and he has works 23 works, 70 publications in one language and 411 library holdings. His genres church history, history, biographies, and local history. His role is author, editor, and other. View a brief summary of the book of Ambrose. The book of Ambrose Coleman is entitled as the Friars in the Philippines, published in 1899. It's about the conquest of Spain in the Philippines, colonization and end. In this book, it is stated that the purpose of Spaniard is to make the natives submit to King Philip with the price of Christianity and civilization. Chapter 1: The Work of the Religious Orders in the Philippines. In 1565, an expedition of 400 soldiers and sailors was fitted out by Philip II and placed under the leadership of Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, with the cause of persuading the natives to submit to the King of Spain, through whom they would obtain the twofold blessing of civilization and Christianity. The Philippine population, which is variously estimated at from 8 to 10 million. The only concern of the Spaniards is with the Malays, who form the vast bulk of the population and have in the course of time been nearly all converted to Christianity. Nearly 7 million Christians are counted among them, while the unconverted pagans, together with the Moros or Malay Mohammedans of Mindanao and the Sulu Islands, are not a million in number. In the book, it is stated that Christianity has effected a wonderful transformation in the character of the people from barbarous to civilized people. Mr. Making a scratch Protestant who spent some years there says that the warriors who gained them over the Spain were not their steel chivalry, but the soldiers of the cross. The priests who astonished and kindled them by their enthusiasm in the cause of Christ. Dampier, the English navigator, stated that one century had changed the people from savagery to civilization. In Manila, Dampier found the natives pursuing all the avocations of civilized life. They were merchants, skilled artisans in various trades, clerks, etc. Ethnography and philology are much indebted to the Franciscan labors. There were three large colleges, two under the care of the Dominicans and one carried by the Augustinians. There were also poor Clare convent. The religious establishments occupied one-third of the city as it then stood. One of the college that the Dominicans are in charge of was the University of Manila, which was founded and confided to their care. The Jesuits. The Jesuits have the great results in their evangelical labors, as most of the heathen tribes are now entirely or in part converted to Christianity. Their missionaries still carried them to Mindanao, but inaccessible. Their direct, however, a flourishing college at Manila, and are in charge of a famous observatory. Their missionary skill carried them to Mindanao, an island so inaccessible. It was directed until 1896 by the well-known astronomer and meteorologist Father Frederick Farah. By its successful prediction of typhoons, so common and destructive in the Philippines, the observatory soon won for itself an enviable reputation throughout the archipelago. The observatory comprises four departments: the meteorological, seismological, magnetic, and astronomical. Each department has its special director, and a general director is at the head of the whole establishment. Father Farad died in January 1897. His death was that of a martyr of charity. Before that, he managed to bring Rizal to repentance, a devotee till his death. Of the fathers, seven of whom are teachers. The Augustinians also conducted a splendid orphanage and industrial school at Tambon, about a league from Manila. There was an orphan asylum for girls at Mandaluyong on the Tasig, conducted by Augustinians, 122 in number. The Franciscan had services to the hospitals of the archipelago, the principal of which are the Royal Hospital of St. Lazarus at Manila, the Infirmary of St. Anne in the province of Laguna, and that of Beza in the province of Camarines. The highlight of this chapter is the development of the people through the colonization of the Spaniards and how their region conquered the island. Chapter 2: The charges made against the religious orders considered. In 1896, there is an uprising of 1,000 rebels in the remoter parts of the Philippines, which the Spaniards that could still control. Yet it continued, and rumors tells about murdering of monks and friars. They then realized that the insurrection is not normal and is directed against the church. It is said that some of the persecutors had been in Europe and become revolutionists in the sense of promoting disorder as anarchists. It was the antagonism of the church to murderous anarchy that aroused the insurgents of the Philippines to become deadly enemies of priests and religious orders. Senor S. C. Valdez, a Filipino, asserts that the inhabitants of the Philippines are not naked savages, and added that they are well educated. He asserts that the friars are incompetent men of his stamp are found declaring the resolve of the inhabitants of the Philippines to be freed and civilized, and not to be subjected to domination of friars or monkish orders, and demeans the character of the missionaries. He also added that they are being corrupted by the friars by their collection of tax, in which the friars denied and say they collect it not for themselves but for the spread of the religion in neighboring countries. A few quotations from Protestant travelers who visited the Philippines before the insurrection had biased men's minds. It is said that the native themselves say that they under excellent regulation. Sir John Bowring in 1859, he said they exercise an influence which would seem magical were it not by their devotees. Deemed divine, Dr. Ball, an American Protestant traveler, speaks highly of the character of the Spanish friars in the Philippines. Mr. McMacking, another Protestant who spent some years in the island, says, in 1861, most of the priests I came in contact with appeared to be thoroughly convinced of and faithful. It is added that the rebels are good in creating stories, an instance of the power of concocting a story to bring the friars into disrepute. The attempted poisoning of Aguinaldo by a Spanish prisoner and 11 Franciscans taken from the Republica Filipina. The story goes to show that his steward saw a Spanish prisoner who was allowed a certain amount of freedom, tempering with the bowl of soup intended for Aguinaldo. The steward tasted spoonful of the soup and fell dead on the spot. After the natives learned the story, they attempted to lynch all the Spain prisoners, but through Aguinaldo's intervention, they were protected from violence, in which they claim is still story. In this chapter, it is strongly asserted that the charges against the friars are concocted, as there are no witnesses, and that tax gained is not used for the luxurious living of the priests. Chapter 3. The rebellion, largely the work of a secret organization. It is believed that the rebellion is caused by a secret organization known as Freemasonry. In what they believe controlled it is since the last 150 years. They claim that Freemasons had indoctrinated a large number of active and restless spirits with revolutionary and anti-Christian ideas. It is said that the Philippine Freemasonry is sanguinary in nature. The growth of Freemasonry in the Philippines was recorded in about 1860, a period when England, Holland, France, and the United States, for colonial reasons for their own, showed hostility to Spain. That time many strangers who frequented the, the Philippines were Freemasons and members of the lodges of Singapore, Hong Kong, Java, Macau, and the open ports of China. The two opposing fractions of Freemasonry, one on Spanish center and directed principally by Spaniards, the other directed principally by Germans, English, and Americans, and opposed religious orders, paved the way for the insurrection, for it is well known that from the ranks of the opposing fractions, and principally by reason of their anti-clerical tendencies, arose the sanguinary Society of the Katipunan, which made it its direct aim to expel the friars and overturn the Spanish government in the island. The Grand Orient, the organ of the society, declared that one of the first articles of its program was the extermination of the religious. The position of the religious orders in the Philippines just before the war broke out between Spain and America had become so perilous and unbearable that they addressed a long memorial to the Spanish government, exposing their grievances, explaining the cause of the rebellion, and suggesting remedies suitable for the situation. The memorial of the Philippine friars to the Spanish government, April 1898, to His Excellency the Colonial Minister. In the clause states that the order have borne patiently with the Freemasons and insurgents, and having fostered the rebellion, it was asserted that the orders in the Philippines was so shaken that it would be necessary to drive them out by armed force. Reasons for our silence till the present time. In this it is stated that the order believed that they stayed silent to cease the attack, but it fails. In the Treaty of Biak na Bato, made by the rebel chiefs, states that the religious institutes were the sole cause of the insurrection, and their expulsion is their desire. Next is the religious orders persecuted because they uphold religion. In the clause, it is stated that religious institutes were persecuted because of their religious doctrine. The next one, the religious persecuted as loyal Spaniard. In this clause, it's known that religious characters in the archipelago are the permanent Spanish institution. Is the reason why they are the target of the attack. Next, craftiness of the insurgent chiefs. In the clause, it states that the rebel chiefs' craftiness as they throw accusations to the religious and not of the civil and military functionaries, as they would have all the Spanish element in the archipelago league against them, and would have the door closed to all their means of propaganda. Accusation against the religious orders. In this, it is stated that clergies were claimed as the enemies of the education and of the diffusion of knowledge. The friars rejected the claim and added that very few of the native officials in rebel are individuals who failed their career or were the refused in their causes. Cause of the rebellion. The clause contains this clause contains the clergy's claim that the Freemasonry has been the principal cause of the social disorganization of the Philippine and rebel wish for independence. And the last one, unjust contempt shown towards the religious orders in the Philippines. The clause states that friars could no longer bear the contempt as they are no longer being respected by the people and are seen as evil. In this chapter 3, the important detail given in this chapter is that the friars asserted that the Freemasons are the cause of rebellion through their meticulous and patient planning and the creation of the memorial to explain and express their grip on the war.
Chapter 4: The Rebels and Their Grievances. The chapter stated that it was independence from all control the rebels want, which caused the war to Spaniards and Americans. After the armistice of the First War, they claimed Aguinaldo pocketed the money and went off to Hong Kong. But when the war came to Manila and destroyed the Spanish fleet, the men returned to the Philippines and once more raised rebellion. This rebellion made them say derogatory phrases such as, all colored and tropical races have a tendency to revert to their original type and barbarous customs of their ancestors. 10 Spanish Augustinian friars recently came to San Francisco from the Philippines. They stated that it was not through fear of the Americans that they had left Manila, but they believed that the church would prosper under American rule. They added that the Filipinos are ungrateful to what the religious institution did to them, and are inhuman because of how they treat the prisoners. One of the grievances of the rebels is that they demand an entirely native clergy. Another grievances, brought well to the front by those who have written on behalf of the Filipinos, is the taxation, which is allegedly to have been excessive. These problems are what the Americans will face as well. One test of the mild rule of the Spaniard in the Philippines is the increase of population. The Spaniards hope that the Americans' rule to the Philippines will be characterized by clemency and justice, not tyranny. This chapter stated that the grip of the rebels, immediate war of the rebels to the Americans, and the insights of the foreign people to the Filipinos about the reasons for this rebellion. Chapter 5: The Sectarian Missionary Movement. It is stated that the change in the Philippines government and religious institution will be big. Philippines would have the English-speaking Catholic public since the control had passed from Spain to America. Under the old regime, church and the state were united and supports one another. In the new conditions of things, the church will be placed in the same condition as it holds in America, free to flourish or to die. The Protestant missionary bodies have inaugurated a movement for sending out missionaries of their own to the archipelago. Reverend John R. Hikes, on his sensational report, indicates the hopelessness of getting fair and unbiased treatment from the enemies of the church, and that he was shocked by the stories of immorality against the friars. There are lots of ideas on how the Americans will continue the Christianity, and there are lots of missionaries in it. A personal opinion of the author stated that a non-sectarian but strictly evangelical mission aiming at the Christianization of the whole territory is what would succeed the best. It also stated that it's certain that the Americans will never succeed in making the Philippines a Protestant country. There are many problems which the Americans will face in the Philippines, graver than the Americans' Congress' military occupations of the country, especially financially. John Foreman's September 1898 advocates the disownment of the church as a necessary financial measure which will bring a certain amount of relief to the colonial treasury. He adds that the introduction of agriculture is Spaniards' efforts. The school question is one of the gravest problems that the American government will be called upon to face when her troops have successfully occupied the Philippines. Secularization of education will tend to drive every form of religion out of the people. For Protestantism could not hope to make headway for a long time in the Philippines. As to say the least, it will take some years for the ministers to get a sufficient knowledge of the various languages in use, and establish themselves in face of the opposition they are sure to meet with. It will also put all the friars in oppositions to the government, while fair treatment could make them its best friends and urge them to keep the people as loyal to the American Constitution as they kept them to the Spanish crown for 3 centuries. To counteract the baleful influence of the Protestant missionary and Bible societies, it will be necessary for the Catholic Church in America to send out English-speaking priests at once to the Philippines to make up for the great debt of the priests caused by the excesses of the rebels. Priests are wanted for the Philippines who can make their voice heard beyond its boundaries, who can mold public opinion by means of the daily press, who can keep in touch with the politics and legislations of United States, and can bring public opinion there to bear on a just and unfair treatment, if anything of the kind is attempted against the Catholics on the archipelago. The last chapter is about the falling of the Philippines to the American hand, and how America will handle the problems of the country it conquered is facing. From the book's preface, the author Ambrose Coleman dictates that the context originally appeared in the magazine articles in both England and America. The author uses secondary sources, and the book mate is a secondary source too, which means he didn't experience what is written on the book and relies on other articles and mediums. The author's approach in writing the book is full of context and objectivity to support the praises written. It's full of opinions coming from the magazines, from people to people, especially in latter parts. The some parts feels like reading a gossip of colonial times. It's based on the Friars' view, so it is somewhat subjective on those parts. The merit of this book is how we get to know the politics and trouble of Spain. The views of the sources of the book, America and England, we see how racist these countries could be. This book also shows how colonialization affects different countries, as it included in the appendices. The only flaw is that there are hardly any details about the side of the Filipino.
Intended purpose of this book and how it contributes to improving in academic life operations will be the discipline of the College of Planning Engineering. Studying history helps us understand and grapple with complex questions in dilemma by examining how the past has shaped, or continues to shape, global, national, and local relationships between societies and people. Also, the purpose of this book is for the use of anyone, anywhere at no cost and with almost no restriction and etc.
I think one of the important aspects is that the missionaries in the chapter 1 is really devoted to the development of the country and to promulgate Christianity in it, and that even 333 years of colonialization is still not enough to shake our desire for independence.